Hey guys, this is Royal.
And this is Michael Little.
And you're listening to the Laker Lounge. Welcome to the second episode of the Laker Lounge. I'm Royal and I'm here with my co-host Michael.
Hey Royal, it's great to be back, and today we're going to be talking about the upcoming election, and I'm excited about our guest.
Me too, Michael, but before we get to our in-studio guest, we spent some time at the on-campus voter registration drive last week talking with our students about why they plan to vote in this year's election.
I plan on voting in November because I want to be a part of the major change in my community.
Yes, I am going to go vote. I believe it is important because either you are wanting to maintain or change policies, and whichever side you're on, you can be a part of picking it.
I am voting in November because it is important for us young people to get out there and vote so our voices can be heard, because we make a big change in what's going to happen depending on who wins the election.
Hey, I think it's important to vote because as a member of the chronic illness community, I think it's very important to voice for people who are unable to voice for themselves and say your opinion for people that aren't able to.
It's great hearing the excitement our students have for being part of our democracy.
Absolutely, and to talk more about the election, we have joining us today Dr. Josh Meddaugh, Associate Professor of Political Science here at Clayton State. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Meddaugh.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So, Dr. Meddaugh, what are the hot political topics in Georgia and nationally right now, and what are voters paying most attention to?
So this is a midterm election. So what we normally see during a midterm election is less attention. Usually what are your partisan faithful are the ones who tend to come out and pay attention during these elections, but there's always very hot button issues that happen. And this year in Georgia specifically, we're looking at some very major issues that are piggyback off of what happened in 2016. Specifically, the number one issue we're looking at here is electoral fraud. Right now, we are trying to figure out, Georgia is one of the few states that have complete electronic voting. And they are susceptible, these electronic machines, to outside hacking. So Georgia has decided to not go to paper ballots to back up the votes, and it's becoming a hot button issue between the two gubernatorial candidates, trying to figure out if this election could be affected by outside hacking. The local area itself in Atlanta, not a ton of hot button issues for Atlanta in the major midterm race for us at the governor's race. But Georgia is really dealing a lot with climate control, climate change, and the situations that's going on in Savannah specifically. Savannah is begging the state legislature for money to dredge. They are losing land to climate change. It's getting to a point where the partisanship of climate change needs to end. Climate change is a very real issue that's affecting all citizens, Democrat, Republican, and Savannah and the representatives for Savannah are begging for help. So over the next 12 months specifically, you're going to start hearing a whole lot about what's going on in Savannah, climate change, and eventually Cumberland Island and Jekyll Island, and the lack of land that's happening because of the rising waters. Other major issue in Georgia is Medicaid expansion, healthcare. What we're looking at is we have citizens who don't have health care. The Affordable Care Act, parts of it were repealed. And now Georgia has decided they're not going to expand Medicaid. So we have a number, about 1 million right now currently, of uninsured voters who are going to lose their health care and can't get it under Medicaid expansion. So it's going to be another hot button issue about how to extend what is happening with health care in this country. Nationally, your other question, again, very representative of what's going on in Georgia. Climate change, big issue. Unprotected land that were protected being removed by the Trump administration. We're also talking healthcare, Medicaid expansion. And the big setup of immigration is going to be the next talking point for the 2020 election, immigration and healthcare. We are at a break point with immigration. Our immigration is staying kind of flatline, and it seems to be a larger talking point than it is a national problem. But when we're seeing candidates run on very polarized immigration issues, it's going to be a setup. So pay attention over the next 2 years for the major talking points of 2020, which will deal with immigration and Medicaid expansion.
Josh, looking at the national landscape, Republicans currently hold control of both the U.S. House and U.S. Senate, and there's a lot of focus on whether Democrats can regain one or both of these legislative branches. Can you tell us the likelihood of that happening?
Absolutely. So this is really fun. This is the best part about dealing when you're looking at the political science aspect of the House and the Senate. You remove your ideology, you remove your partisanship, and you're trying to figure out which side's going to win. So currently the Republicans have both sides, right? Senate's much closer than the House. And there is a lot of discussion out there that the Democrats could take both houses. The likelihood of the Democrats taking both of the chambers is low. They have a really good shot, though, of taking the House. The House we'll talk about easily. Currently, there's about an 80% chance for the Democrats to take the House. They need to flip 24 seats in the House right now to go from Democrat to Republican to Democrat. 25 of those seats are in Hillary Clinton voting areas. So they're going to flip those seats. Actually, the prediction right now from 538.com, which I recommend as a great resource to use for election prediction, has a 80% chance and plus 36 seats for the House for the Democrats. So there's a really good likelihood, 80% good numbers, that the Democrats take the House. The flip side is the Senate. The likelihood that the Democrats take the Senate is very, very low. We're talking about 30-ish, maybe 25%. What we're looking at specifically when you break down the Senate is there's 35 seats open right now in the Senate. Only 13 of those seats are considered competitive. Those are the 13 seats we're going to look at. So the Democrats need 2 seats to flip. It's a 51-49 split that Republicans in control. So there's 13 seats, Democrats need 2. But of those 13 seats, the breakdown looks really tough for the Democrats. They have 5 likely seats and 3 that lean Democrat. So those are 8 seats they're already banking on. 1 seat leans Republican and 1 seat is likely Republican. So those 2 are out of the way. So all we're talking about is about 3 toss-up seats in the entire election. Democrats need to flip 2 of them. And this is where it gets very tricky. One of the seats is already a Democrat incumbent seat. So they can't flip that. So that seat is a Heitkamp, a Democrat in North Dakota, and her likelihood of keeping the seat, she's the incumbent, is about 51%. Probably incumbents tend to win. They have about a 90% chance of being reelected. She's going to keep that seat. Democrats are going to keep that seat. Doesn't really do anything. So now you have 2 seats left. They got to flip them both to flip the Senate. Jackie Rosen, the Democrat, is leading 48.9% to 48.3% to Dean Heller, the incumbent, in another race. But that situation in Nevada looks good for the Democrats. They're going to flip that seat. So now we're looking 50-50. If they want to totally flip the Senate, they got to get Marsha Blackburn in Tennessee to lose. But Marsha Blackburn it's an open seat in Tennessee, which is interesting. She's a Republican candidate leading about 49.3% to Phil Bredson's 47.7%, the Democrat. This is really interesting. It's an open seat election, meaning there's no incumbent, but it is a Republican incumbent seat. So if the Republicans keep that seat, they get retold the House. They'll control the House. Likelihood the Democrats flip that seat is very low. So it's going to be a 50-50 split, but Vice President Mike Pence will break the tie. So the Senate will keep in control by the Republicans.
Wow, that was some great, interesting facts to hear and to break it down like that, Dr. Meddaugh. Wow.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dr. Meddaugh, if you just don't mind elaborating a little bit on what do you think kind of, when you say that it is likely or it leans, what are some of the factors that go into determining, besides incumbency, like you mentioned, that might make a seat flip?
Great question. So the idea here is a likelihood of a likely seat or a leaning seat this is a seat that tends through history has voted one way over the other. So if it's a likely Republican seat, that means, or a likely Democrat seat for the past couple elections, it has voted probably a Republican or Democrat, has stayed that way consistently election after election. And it might be a close race, but the likelihood that it flips is low. A leaning seat means this area tends to be more down the middle, but people of that district tend to vote one way over the other consistently election after election. Solid seats, of course, those are the seats that are always going to stay the same. They're going to be solidly red or blue. It doesn't really matter. It's those very few competitive seats is where the interesting discussions come in.
So neither of Georgia's U.S. Senate seats are up for election this cycle, but of course each U.S. House seat is, like it is every 2 years. Which of these elections will be the most contested in Georgia, if any?
Neither actually are going to be contested. They are contested. So there's the two Republican incumbents are running, but the real problem here is that there's no real competition from the Democratic side. They're going to remain Republican seats. The fascinating thing is it was actually the runoff election and the chance to have a strong candidate run in a primary. As soon as the Republicans cleared the primary threshold, there's no real challenge. They're not going to change. Those are two solidly Republicans.
You're referring to the congressional 6th district race.
Yes, 6th district. Those are very strong Republican seats. They're not going anywhere. And it got a lot of outside attention. A lot of outside money came into the race. It just didn't really flip the way that they wanted to. So the Democratic Party sees an opportunity in Georgia in the 6th district, but it's going to need some time.
So the most watched election in Georgia, of course, is the race for governor. It appears it will not just be noticed in our state, but also get a lot of national press. Can you talk briefly about the Republican and Democratic candidates, their positions on the key issues, and what might the state see legislatively or politically if either of them wins?
So this is a very kind of hot button race. You have two candidates, Stacey Abrams, the Democrat, and Brian Kemp, the Republican, who tend to take extreme positions. They are very right and very left, which is where we are politically today. It used to be that you'd run towards the middle, try to get some people from the other side to vote for you. Both candidates have decided to go right to their party fringe and focus on outside issues. This is why it's gotten a lot of national attention. And Georgia's getting a lot of national attention because it's a changing demographic state. Georgia is a solidly Republican state, but there's really honestly no reason for it. Atlanta, large urban area, one of the largest urban areas in the country, votes Democrat. That's where a lot of the population is in the state of Georgia. If the voter turnout in Atlanta is high, that could switch this election and make the state blue. That's why the country is watching how much urbanization really matters. But what has become a very polarizing race is because of the candidates' positions. You have one candidate, and Brian Kemp, who's been very extremist on immigration in his campaign commercials, and went around saying he'll load up illegal immigrants in his truck and take them to like immigration, which, be it as it may, that is his position. Stacey Abrams has backed away from a lot of actually positions. She won't take a stand on human trafficking and sex trafficking in this country, which is a major issue for the Democratic Party of Georgia, considering Georgia has a very real issue with sex trafficking through the area. She actually often refuses to get into the discussion of her immigration policy or abortion. What she does tend to focus on is Medicaid expansion, which is a good thing and very far about expanding rights to health care. But she remains relatively quiet, while Kemp, on the other hand, who has the benefit of being the Secretary of State, pushes his very extremist ideological positions, and he's very adamantly tying himself to President Donald Trump, which is a very interesting idea because Trump is a very polarizing candidate, about 30% approval rating kind of like annually, daily. He is trying to push to the means. So what we're going to see here is I wouldn't be shocked if you actually see a little bit of a decline in the voter turnout for the governor's race because of the extremist positions. But it's getting a lot of national attention because you have a traditional Republican state could flip blue, but it's kind of a wait and see.
So are there any other key races in Georgia that our listeners should be keeping an eye on, or any under-the-radar races that you're looking at?
The most fascinating situation in race in Georgia right now is actually a ballot proposition, and it deals with the new city, a proposed city of Eagles Landing, Georgia. Eagles Landing, the proposed city, is in between the cities of Stockbridge and Meddaugh.
Right in our backyard.
Yep, right in our backyard. Look, it's actually right where I live. It's a very fascinating situation because not just for me living there, it has a lot to do with the ramifications of what could happen. Long story short is there is a proposal to create a new city of Eagles Landing that would split the existing city of Stockbridge in half, where Stockbridge would lose about over 50 to 55% of its tax base to a brand new city, which is very fascinating. And there's not a lot of precedence for this. If this happens, we're going to see a kind of a trigger effect in Georgia because the city of area of Buckhead wants to become its own city. They want to pull from Atlanta. And what's really fascinating there is they need precedent, which would be created by the creation of Eagles Landing, a new city being pulled from another city. And it gets really interesting when you look at the finances of the situation, where the city of Stockbridge owes about $11 million to municipal bonds. A new city would take all the residents of that new city and not have them not pay that tax. Buckhead wants to do the exact same thing if they leave Atlanta and want to leave Atlanta's debt behind. So it's a major, it looks like a local issue, it is, but it's a major issue for the statewide of a big growing area of the city of Atlanta that could pull out and make its own city. I'd pay attention to that proposal of this new city of Eagles Landing.
Because it can create a domino effect, like you said, right?
Yep, and it's all started from Sandy Springs a few years ago. And it's Georgia, the population's growing, but this one is uniquely financial. This is Eagles Landing would include the country club, would include a lot of high income areas. Specifically, the median income of Stockbridge is about $50,000 for a family. Eagles Landing is $128,000. Wow. So yeah, it would create a new city where the median income would be $128,000.
Wow. Yeah. Can you talk to us a little about turnout expectations with no presidential or Senate election to drive the top of the ticket? You mentioned that you think the turnout is going to be lower than expected, but can we expect truly a lower turnout, or will the attention on the governor's race perhaps get the people to the polls?
Okay, good question. So in political science, we have few laws, and actually one of the rare laws of political science is surge and decline. In a presidential election, there is a surge to the polls, meaning a lot of people come out to vote for the president. So there's a large number of voter turnout. In the midterm, it declines because there's not a presidential ticket to vote for. So there will be a decline at the midterm. Voter turnout is going to be low. But the question is, will it be normal for a midterm? Right. So, and that's what we're actually kind of seeing. It probably will be about normal. You're talking 30%. It's not a great number. But what it is you're seeing this a very normal midterm election. What you are losing here is what's called peripheral voters. Peripheral voters are the people who only vote once every 4 years. They're the ones who come to vote out for the presidential election. They don't vote during midterms. So those with that electorate gone, you're only looking at party faithful. So you're asking, how do we turn out peripheral voters in the midterm? Can a governor's race do that? It would have to be a very interesting, honestly, star-studded candidate event. If it was two, honestly, celebrities running, maybe, but not really. So turnout's going to be low, but as long as it stays within the margins, that's totally fine and what we expect. It's just the real issue is when you break it down for the governor's race is how that affects who becomes governor. Historically, Republicans vote more than Democrats. They tend to turn out more, they vote more than Democrats. The Democratic Party relies on voting bases that tend to vote less. Young people, lower income, and African American is the Democratic Party base. They vote at lower rates than white and working class, and the white working class is Republican. So what's super fascinating is this governor's race can be decided by a group of people who aren't showing up. That's how close the last governor's election was.
So speaking of the percentages, there are a lot of our listeners who may be feeling like my vote just isn't going to matter, isn't going to count. Tell us why. You just gave us some numbers that are very real. Why is it important for you to get up and get out there and get to the polls and vote?
You've been hearing this forever. Voting is your duty. Voting is your right. You can really change elections. Nationally, it seems a little weird because they have the Electoral College and there's multiple steps. But at the local level, your vote really does matter. You are adding up to a popular vote tally to elect the next governor. Your vote means I voted yes for this person and it's one tally. This is an election where you really can change the outcome. Local elections change. I can give a very quick anecdotal story about how much local elections matter. My father-in-law, when he was in college, he was getting ready. He came home from the weekend. This is back in New York. He came home, spent a little break, whatever. His father, my grandfather-in-law, was running for local election, town supervisor. He said, Ken, go ahead. He's like, make sure to vote before you leave. My father-in-law said, yep, absolutely. Got in his car, drove back to Plattsburgh, which is like an 8-hour trip from New York, totally forgot to vote. And on the way back, he's like, what's that really going to matter? My grandfather-in-law, his father, lost the election by 1 vote. Wow. It's a true story. If my father-in-law would have went to vote, it would have been a tie. They would have had a runoff election, and then they would have counted absentee ballots, and my grandfather-in-law would have been the town supervisor. But by 1 vote, This is a very true story, and it's still brought up every Thanksgiving.
I was going to ask what the dinner table was like that next day.
That's how much local elections matter. You have a voice.
So there are a couple of important dates coming up for the election. Remind our listeners when the deadline to register to vote is, and what day election day is this year, and where can they go to find their polling location?
Good questions. All right. October 9th is the day that you need to remember. October 9th is the last day to register to vote in the state of Georgia, and election day is November 6th. If you need to know where you registered or where to register or where your polling place is, you want to go to the My Voter page, and My Voter page is mvp.sos.ga.gov. That's the Secretary of State's page. It tells you where your polling station is, and you can go ahead and find all your information there. My Voter page, or you can hit Turbo Vote. It's everywhere. Ballotpedia is another great place. This information is everywhere for you. Don't use ignorance as a chance not to vote.
Wow, thank you so much, Dr. Meddaugh, for your time. This was such an enlightening conversation. Thank you.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure.
Alumni, don't forget that this weekend is Alumni Weekend. There's still time to register for the Young Alumni Social, and that's going to be taking place on Friday, October the 5th. And then Laker Fest is going to happen that Saturday with a low country boil, drinks, live music, and kids entertainment. So we look forward to seeing you there.
I'm super excited, Michael. I am registered. I can't wait to see all of my Laker Nation and alumni family members out there. Cannot wait for Alumni Weekend. As we're going through this, I do want to say one special announcement. The Department of Campus Life will be hosting our annual Diversity and Leadership Institute. And as we have this conversation about civic engagement, this year's topic is called the Freedom Ride. And it's all about your ability to express your freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and freedom of right to vote. And so this conversation has just led to my excitement as we get ready for our Diversity and Leadership Institute on Friday, October 12th.
And we're excited about that event. And so listeners, next month, join us for episode 3 of the Laker Lounge, when we will be joined by Frank Mervin, Clayton State's Veteran Resource Center Coordinator, and Ashley Green, a student veteran, to help us recognize on Veterans Day those who have served our country. So see you next month. The Laker Lounge is a collaborative production between the Office of Marketing and Communications and the Office of Alumni Engagement. Assistant Vice President of Marketing and Communications is Maritza Ferreira. The Laker Lounge is co-produced by Brandon McCowan, University videographer. Website administrator is Leanne Bradbury. Graphic designer is Heidi Weathersby. And your hosts are Michael Little and Atawanna Royal.